grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
You're listening to Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption. I'm one of your hosts, Jo Sparrow. This podcast is a production of Jigsaw Queensland Post-Adoption Support Service. However, the views expressed are those of the people participating, not necessarily Jigsaw Queensland. The podcast discusses adult themes and listener discretion is advised. Today's guest, Arie Baker, was born in Brisbane in 1974 at the Corinda Private Hospital, where she was adopted at 3 weeks of age. Today, Arie will share with us her experience of adoption and searching for her biological family, and how her desire to make sense of that experience led her to write a book that is a mix of fiction and non-fiction. Welcome to Adopt Perspective, Arie. I'm so happy to have you join us.
Thank you, Jo. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm truly honoured to join with your audience and the adoptive community. Thank you.
Arie, could I start by asking you to share with us what it was like for you to grow up adopted?
Sure, Jo. Well, I was always told that I was adopted. So from a very young age, I don't remember ever not knowing. I was told that my birth mother wanted a better life for me, and that what she did when she gave me up, she did with love. I was brought up an only child with two wonderful, beautiful parents who nurtured me, supported me. I was extremely lucky that I went to such a loving household. I had wonderful childhood, lots of love and affection, lots of beautiful holidays away, and a good education, everything, that a kid could want. I was truly blessed, and I always felt really special in a way that I was adopted. It was like a blessing in my life. Although I used to wonder growing up, I used to wonder about my birth mother, especially what she looked like, if there was any medical history that I could get. And as I got older, those questions became a bit more intriguing to me. In 1991, I believe the legislation in Queensland changed, and it was shortly just before my 18th birthday, actually, that I received a letter from the Department of Communities, and it was in the media at the time. So I was aware that, perhaps this was my birth mother, come to find me after all these years, now that the legislation had changed. So it was a pivotal moment, and I recall opening this letter with trepidation and reading that my birth mother had placed what was then known at the time as a veto on contact. So what that meant in essence was what we now call a contact statement, that she didn't want to have any contact. And it was a bittersweet moment for me, because on the one hand, I knew that she was still alive. So that was something that I took as promising, that she was still alive. But unfortunately, she wanted to maintain her privacy, and so obviously I had to deal with that in my own way. And I think I just put it all aside for a very long time. All thoughts of my adoption, just got on with my life. Until about 1997, which is actually when my first son was born. And when I looked at his eyes after he was born, and I saw in those eyes, my very same eyes, I think it ignited something in me for me to realize, hey, like there has got to be some people out there. I can't have just appeared on this earth. There must be some people out there that look the same as me, not just my son. So I guess that brings us to where a lot of my journey of my search for my birth mother really began.
Yeah. And that's interesting because I think sometimes adopted people get feedback that if they're looking to search, it's because they're unhappy with their experience with their adoptive parents and, or they're ungrateful or whatever. And what you're expressing is what I hear so often is that, they might have had a really great experience with their adoptive family, but there was still a desire sitting inside them. Can you kind of remember anything that sort of steered you towards that search? Were there any sort of pivotal moments that led to you searching?
Sure. So apart from when my son was born, I remember clearly going in to have a meeting with the director of communities at the time, and with him in his stroller, and took him in and begged her if I could please just have a look at my file, if I could please just have a name, if I could just have something. And I remember her saying that my file, my full unredacted file, was sitting not more than probably 2 meters away from us in another room in a locked filing cabinet, but because of legislation, she just couldn't help me. And it was so frustrating for me as an adoptive person to deal with all of the red tape that surrounded my search. And I remember this lady at the time saying that they were looking at changing legislation and they needed change makers, and that she could see me one day taking up the baton to work towards change for the adoptive community. But I was a new mum. I didn't have the time or the energy at that point to try and change the system. I was just part of the system, and I had to abide at that point with the contact statement. And I was reminded every single time I had anything to do with the department, I was reminded that it was an offence if I were to search for my birth mother or if I were to search for my birth father. And so I think that spurred me on as well, because I thought that, why couldn't I have access to my own information? Why couldn't I have my original birth certificate, for example? Why couldn't I have any medical history if there was some? So in 1997, I did apply for non-identifying information, which was provided to me at the time. So I had some very basic information and wasn't able to do very much with that. Until 2013, I applied for and received my adoption information again. And this time I received my original adoption order, a photocopy of it. And it had some more information on there that had not been redacted. And for the first time in my life, I could see my birth mother's full name. But yet, once again, I was reminded that it was an offence for me to try and contact her, which of course I respected. One thing I do remember seeing was the consent form, which was included in the paperwork, and on that was her signature, where she had given her consent to adopt me. And I remember just tracing my finger over and over this wavy signature, because it felt to me like the only tangible thing that I'd ever known of this woman. And it was such a powerful moment for me that once again it spurred me on to search for her, that she was out there somewhere. And I searched electoral rolls. I jumped online. Back then we had ancestry.com, obviously was well and up running by then. So, I did make some searches, but I came up with nothing. Every single time I hit a brick wall, there was there was nothing that I could find on her except some very basic information such as her vocation and the hometown that she was from, but it only went back to the early 80s. So I had very little information to go by until in 2016 when we had a massive legislation change here in Queensland. And in April, I was given an authorisation to get my original birth certificate and to do name searches via births, deaths and marriages to see if my birth mother had married or if she had changed her name. All of that came up, once again, not being able to find anything. But what I did find out in April of 2016 was my birth father's name. My putative birth father's name was finally redacted. And on the 11th of the 11th, 2016, I found him. I found him by searching online, and I was actually doing an image search for some reason, and I put in this person's name because he had a middle name, which made it a little easier to try and search for him. So I just Googled it, and it brought up a photo of a man, and I just knew straight away that he was my birth father. I knew it. It was like coming home. I was so excited. Finally, after all this time, I had located one of the missing pieces of my puzzle, and I elatedly clicked on the next image, and it was the monument from his passing. So it was a plaque from the funeral home. So I went from this moment of pure elation and homecoming and joy to absolute despair and grieving someone that I had never even known. So he was 52 when he died. And when the date that I found him was actually 7 years after his passing. But I had been searching for him all of that time, and I found it extremely frustrating that he would have been searching for me too. And there was drugs and alcohol involved in his life, and I do believe that he was a victim of the system, and he felt bound by the constraints of the system, and I think it did cost him an early life.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
I'm
it's
so
very
sorry.
sad.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
That's what you discovered.
Yeah, but on the plus side, I did locate my biological uncle, who was his older brother, and that was through ancestry.com. He was the person who had actually posted all of these photos online, and I sent him an email just saying, I'm introducing myself and I'm researching my family tree. I think I just worded it that way and gave him some basic info. And he wrote back to me and he said that yeah, they remembered that my birth father had a live-in girlfriend at the time, that she was pregnant. She was young. She was 18. He was 21. And all of a sudden one day she upped and left. He never heard from her again. He never was able to locate the baby again, and he was never the same after that, and pretty much had a life of drugs and alcohol from that point onwards. So that was confirmed. And of course, then he couldn't wait to meet me. And he told me all about, I have lots of cousins and my other aunts and uncles who have chosen for their own reasons to, I guess, maintain their own privacy. So it's not easy, being a ghost in the past and knocking on someone's door, and not everyone's going to accept it the way that you would like. But I was just so blessed and lucky that one of my uncles and his family took me in and took me in as their own. So, yeah, I was so nervous the first day that I went to meet them all, and they put on a homecoming for me. There was food everywhere. I think there was 5 different cheesecakes. It was, you know, everyone was a little nervous. And they brought out some photo albums, and we looked at some photos, and then we were sitting around and we were having lunch, and one of my female cousins and I shared a joke. For some reason, we started laughing. And all of a sudden, everybody that was seated at the table just froze. And we said, "What is it?" And they said, "You two have exactly the same laugh." And my auntie said, "There's absolutely no need for a DNA test. You're obviously one of us."
Yeah.
And I remember my biological uncle just looking at me with so much pride and so much love and so much acceptance. And I feel that there was healing brought to them to think, well, their brother died young when he was 52. He had a sad life. But, maybe he managed to bring something good into the world, some joy to them, some healing for them, and something that they could be proud of and move forward in the future with.
Yeah. Oh, you're giving me goosebumps, Arie. And I am sure that your parents would have been healing, particularly with the issues that your uncles, that your father had, and how that might have impacted his family.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking about, you said the cheesecakes, and it sort of made me reflect back on when I first met my father's extended family, and we all got together and everyone had brought something to eat. And I'd even done a bit of research to find out the kinds of dishes that my grandmother used to make, to see if I could bring something as a way of connection, and how an aunt had created a few of those dishes herself to show me. And somebody gave me a grevillea that, my grandfather used to grow. And all these little ways are a way of connecting, and I don't know, building some ceremony, and I guess saying on both parts, you're included, you're one of us, which is just really beautiful.
Yeah. I was really blessed. For the first 42 years of my life, I felt that I was, not part of anything bigger than my own little family, my own 2 sons that were the only people that, had my same shaped face, my same shaped nose, my same colored eyes. But when I met my biological family, I felt a greater connection than I'd ever known. I felt bigger. I felt a bigger presence in my life, and it helped me to, just put some of those missing pieces together. And I had some snippets of stories from family members that allowed me to start perhaps thinking, well, how did it all happen? How did it all go down? And then I decided, well, I wanted to perhaps reimagine where my origins, how did my story start? They say sometimes, our story doesn't start with us, it belongs with our mother. And that's obviously where I started to look back as to how society was then, what was happening back in the 70s. And so I started doing some research.
Which brings me to my next question, I guess. So you wrote a book about your experience called Finding Mary Jane, A Tapestry of Mother's Love. So can you tell us first a little bit about the book?
Okay, sure. So it's a story of a young woman who is searching for her birth mother. So it is loosely based on my life. It is a story of love. It's a love story, and it's an adventure, and it's a mystery. It's set in Brisbane in the early 70s, and then later on in the late 80s. And it's a book of hope, of love, and a book of redemption. And me reimagining how all of this came about.
Yeah. And that's really interesting to me, because when adopted people do set out to write the story of their lives, or even just think about the story of their lives, I guess, those first chapters are missing. And even when we do get to meet our biological family, sometimes we get sort of conflicting messages, or only parts of the story, because, sometimes it's very traumatic for them to share the full picture, and there's things that they don't want to disclose. Or in your case, where you haven't been able to connect with your mother and your father and get their story at all. So using fiction to help piece together those pieces, even though it might be 100%, not 100% accurate, it's can you tell me, was that cathartic, putting something together? How did it help you?
Yeah. Look, they say that all good writing does come from a place of truth. And I think that's the job of a proficient author, is to blur those lines so that you're left guessing, what is fact and what is fiction. And of course, I love literary fiction and the genre, and a love of writing. So I was left, a few meager threads, but I was able to create a beautiful, magnificent tapestry from that. And I feel that in writing about my experiences, I got to know my birth parents on a deeper level. I got to know them, and I got to sort out those missing pieces that were myself as part of writing. So
Yeah.
I've had some healing that I've brought to myself. I obviously I haven't had the ending that I ideally wanted, but I was able to create that for myself. I was able to write that happy ending, and it has brought me a lot of closure and a lot of healing.
I think of it, like in my own research and writing, I think of it as a monument, because when you have lost biological family through adoption, there's no monument to that loss. There's no place for us to go and grieve that loss in society. It's disenfranchised grief. But when you have written something like a book, you've actually sort of put a headstone up, and you have created a monument to that loss. You've made a real space for it in life. So congratulations. I know that's difficult, but also something that sounds like it's been very cathartic for you.
It has, Joe. It enabled me to get back some of the control that I feel that was taken from me through red tape, through the department, through contact statements, etc. I feel that in writing the ending that I wanted, I finally had the control that I wanted in my story.
Yeah. So what has the family that you still have contact with, what has been their response to the book? Have they read it?
They have. I was extremely nervous to let them know what I'd written. I didn't want to risk losing them again, because they mean so much to me. But I needn't have worried, because they absolutely loved it. And yeah, I think that they're quietly proud as well that perhaps they've seen a side of my birth father that was unknown to them as well. The whys, the questions, they've been answered, and his voice now, I feel, is being able to be heard. And also my birth mother's voice. Back in the day, there was so much stigma and secrecy and shame involved, and their voices were unable to be heard. Their stories weren't heard. So in telling my story, I feel that I've captured their voices somewhat. I don't speak for them, obviously, but I feel that generational trauma that we all come from as adoptees is partly able to be healed if we shine the light on that shame. We end up with redemption and love.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened with me in my life and with my biological family, my adoptive parents as well. It has been difficult for my adoptive parents. Some of the book, there are trigger warnings with the book. So some of it's been difficult, but once again, you can't sort of go through life without having experiences that make you stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm more than happy to share my experiences if I can help other people, especially adoptees, to come to that greater understanding of acceptance.
So do you have any advice for anyone who's considering writing about their adoption experience?
Sure. Look, just go for it. Just write, start journaling. And if you don't know your story, just make up your story. Make it up. I remember a girlfriend called me one day and I was deep in the process of writing. And she said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just writing about my conception," And it's quite a bizarre thing, and not many of us want to think about how we were conceived, or not many people do actually, I guess, even contemplate that. But perhaps being an adoptee, perhaps I come from a slightly different place with that. And so, I don't know how I was conceived. I'd like to think that I was conceived through love. So yeah, why not write it how you want it to be? And I think in the process of it, things will unravel. Things will become clearer to you. I know, for example, with me when I was writing, that my characters sort of almost took over after a little while. They started telling their own stories and their own little narratives, and it was a really cathartic and really powerful process for me for healing, for my journey of healing to begin.
Yeah.
So please,
journal.
Sorry. Yeah, just journal, yes. and get it out on paper.
Fantastic. So where can listeners find your book?
Sure. So it's available in paperback, audiobook, and ebook. You can visit my website, ariebaker.com, or you can check me out on Amazon and most other platforms. But please visit ariebaker.com, and all the details will be there for you to check out.
Excellent. Arie, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I really loved talking with you. I loved your book, and I love that you wrote it and put together those first chapters of your life for yourself and created your monument. And I know that hearing your story is going to help others.
Thank you so much, Jo, and thank you everyone for listening today.
And I'll put up some links to Arie's book and website on our podcast notes page. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. If you have a story that you'd like to share with us and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, jump onto the main podcast page of the Jigsaw Queensland website and complete the prospective guest form that you'll find there. And note that Adopt Perspective can be listened to by people all over the world. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Adopt Perspective podcast. If you'd like to find out more, go to the podcast page on www.jigsawqueensland.com and you'll find a wealth of information and resources on the website. If you reside in Queensland, you can reach Jigsaw Queensland's Forced Adoption Support Service on toll-free 1800 210313, or you can call Jigsaw on 07 33 58 6666. If you live in another state of Australia, you can still call the Forced Adoption Support Service number, and your call will be answered by the Forced Adoption Support Service in the state that you are calling from. In every other state, Relationships Australia operates this service. A big thank you to Matt Sparrow for composing and recording our original theme music. Until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow saying farewell from Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption.